Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at computer game genres. I'm going to be looking at some examples of computer game genres alongside some common features of the computer game genres and maybe some examples of games from each genre. I think one of the early things to bear in mind with this is that this is not an exhaustive list, so there will be other genres out there that are not covered in this video. However, if you want to be covering those later on within your work, you are welcome to. However, just be aware that I'm telling you up front that it does not cover every genre that has ever been invented. And also what you will find is that some genres or some games cross over into multiple different genres. So, for example, you may get one game that is a role-playing game that also kind of acts as maybe a survival horror or an action game that could fall into a role-playing game, and so on and so on. So let's get going. First genre we're going to look at is role-playing game, and RPGs assume the role of characters within a fictional setting. So role-playing games are very common. Elements of RPGs are in an awful lot of games because it's what a lot of developers use in order to pad out their game, and players tend to like that sort of thing, or a lot of players tend to like that sort of thing where, you know, the more kind of autonomy that you have and the more customization and the more you can impact on your character's story and the game's story, people do seem to be liking that. And I think as games progress, we're going to be seeing more and more RPG elements within our games, and I personally like that. I think a lot of players also do, judging by the popularity of these games. What you will find within RPGs, or within some RPGs, is that when you progress with your story, I don't know why I said structures, when you progress with your story, you make decisions within it, and that then has an impact later on in the game. And so let's say, for example, you're playing the game and you decide to be nice to a certain character, and then later on in the game they may give you a gift or such like. However, if you aren't nice to that character, then it may have the opposite effect, and the character that you have been not very nice to may decide to come back and do something which is negative to your character in the future. And a lot of new games have this type of branching arc. So, you know, if I think about something like The Witcher, you can select multiple different options, and there's something like 30 variations of the ending to The Witcher. Elder Scrolls, so Skyrim and Oblivion and so on, you can basically play the game as you like, but if you kill a character within the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, that character is not coming back to life, and so therefore any quests that you may have had with that character aren't going to be available to you, and the faction that character belonged to is probably going to be hostile to you, and that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Or if you side with a certain side, so in Skyrim you have the Imperials, or the I've had a complete mind blank of what they're called, but you have the Imperials, and then you have the natives, Stormcloaks, that's the one. And if you side with one or the other, then you're likely to cut yourself off missions from the other side. So, you know, it's a balancing act, and it's quite good for the developer because ultimately it encourages players to have more than one playthrough to find out whatever endings may be. And that's it. It is very, very popular. Next one I'm going to look at is going to be adventure. So it's basically like an interactive story where there are some vague RPG elements to it. You know, you can still make choices, and you may still get different endings based on that, but ultimately you'll only ever be kind of constrained, or you'll only ever be able to do certain things at certain points within the story. So if you think about the Telltale games who do the Walking Dead series, as you're progressing through the stories in the Walking Dead, you do certain things, and you can only do those things at that point in the game. And after you do that thing, you then progress on to the next scene, and that's always the way it's going to be. Now, let's say you may take some small decisions within it, and that may make some players hostile or not towards you, and that may open up some branching kind of conversations, but the actual story itself is going to be quite samey. I'm not going to lie, I haven't played King's Quest and Monkey Island, but the Telltale games are very popular. They've also done a Game of Thrones series, which was quite enjoyable. Moving on to survival horror, and this is a subgenre of action games in the main, but actually you probably say that the best survival horror games have only very limited sections of action and quite a lot of sections where they build tension. That is really the key part to survival horror, is the effectiveness at the game of building tension within the player. And what you have companies doing in order to build things like tension is limit you in terms of having resources, or you may have overpowered enemies. So if you think about Resident Evil 7, the majority of the enemies within Resident Evil 7 are much more powerful than you are, especially at the beginning of the game. So it's up to you to avoid the enemies rather than taking them all on. Now, as you go through these games, you do tend to build up better arsenal of equipment to deal with the player, the other characters within the game, and you might have a better chance against them. But ultimately, you're still looking to avoid them in the main. Within Dead Space, you can see the Dead Space screen grab on the screen there at the minute. It's one of the most well-known survival horror games. There is a bit more action within Dead Space compared with a game like, for example, Resident Evil, especially the older Resident Evils. But they limit things like your perspective. So if you can see within the screen that your heads-up display HUD is visible to you, which is a great kind of theory and concept. You may think, oh, that's wonderful, but actually, in order to manage your inventory, your game won't ever truly pause. So you might be in your inventory, and all of a sudden the enemy, which is called necromorphs in Dead Space, will come flying out of an air vent when you are off guard, which it does a very good job of building tension. Moving on to strategy games, quite common for mobile games, and they rely on things like you collecting a certain amount of resources in order to win. So, for example, it might be money, it might be to fire a rocket into space, if we're thinking about Civilization, or it may be a military kind of goal where you go around eliminating the opposition, which is easier in some games than others. I've always found it personally quite difficult within Civilization to win that way, but other games and other gamers who may have more experience of it than I do may be better. You've got AoE Age of Empires, one of the most popular series, SimCity, City Skylines. Those last two are predominantly city builders, where actually they don't necessarily have an end game, an end goal, which basically kind of encourages you to play forever, really. Which can be great for things like microtransactions. If you think about the mobile games, which are free for you to play initially, but if you want all the good stuff, you have to pay sometimes quite a lot of money. We'll go more onto that later on when there is an even bigger mobile genre for mobile devices. Next game, sports. So obviously this is a game based on sports. It's usually is done to mimic them to the best of their ability. You can get some games that take it quite light-hearted view. So if you think of Super Mega Baseball, where your character is a big overblown characters with huge, great big muscles and so on. But most of the time you are looking at games which try to mimic the game as accurately as possible. And they sell very well. And that's the kind of thing to bear in mind, that ultimately every year these games are going to sell very well because they have a core market. Some of these games, like FIFA series, people will buy them every year, and it is going to be a game that they play quite a lot in comparison with other games. One of the things that you've got to bear in mind with sports, especially with the Electronic Arts series, is that they have brought in a large amount of microtransactions. FIFA Ultimate Team is a huge cash generator for EA, and you can tell that it has been copied and implemented into other series. So there is a version of Ultimate Team in the NFL games, and it's creeping its way into other games, which is not great. And it is a worry, really, from a personal perspective, that these things are happening. But they do exist, and people will spend a lot of money on them in order to try and get Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi in a pack. People will spend large sums of money in order to do that. And I guess you can look back, and if they've spent £100 on packs and they get Messi and they're happy with that, then that's up to them. But the problem is that it kind of goes into other games. So if you think of Shadow of War, which is a game based around Lord of the Rings, there were loot boxes in there that did not need to be there. But anyway, I will move on past that. I say sports games do sell very, very well, and that's why they keep coming out year on year. And although people will say these games don't change every year, they don't necessarily need to change year on year. I mean, if you think about FIFA, the game of football is not going to change. So why would you have a game that, when you play it on the computer, is different to real life? That does not make sense. And it will be the same for other games like golf, for example. People want to play realistic golf games or NFL games or whatever they might be. Moving on past that, we're looking at MMO, so massively multiplayer online games. And these will be similar in the way they work in the main to things like RPGs. So if you think about Elder Scrolls Online is basically a role-playing game with other people, and the Elder Scrolls Online, which got panned when it first was released, has had DLC after DLC, and I mean I don't know the stats for it here, but I would be surprised if it wasn't Bethesda's top money-making game. There will be a hardcore of people that play ESO, and that's part of the attraction, in that you're playing with other players. There will be other examples out there, such as Arma 3 and WoW, which stands for World of Warcraft. I can't say I've ever played World of Warcraft, but it has a huge fan base, and again, a massive money-making game with lots and lots and lots of different players. And I guess if you've got different players and they play in different ways, it's going to make it more exciting, because you don't know who you're going to play with every time. One of the downsides of MMOs is that it does require an online collection. You're not going to be able to connect as effectively if you're not online. I mean, I guess you could have a LAN connection, but actually then you're going to need the computers to be actually physically connected, which in the most part isn't something that's going to happen. We've got racing games. So racing games generally with vehicles, so they can be up either against AI or human opponents. Racing games are very popular as well. So one of the most recent games to come out is Forza Horizon 4, which is hugely popular and a console seller for Microsoft for the Xbox. People will buy Xboxes to play Forza Horizon, and I must admit, I mean, as someone who owns it myself, it's a fantastic game. And visually is superb and really good fun. But there are other examples, such as Gran Turismo. Gran Turismo again was a console seller back for the PlayStation 2 and even the PlayStation 1, I believe. and that was a bench setter for racing games back in the late 90s or so. And Formula One, which isn't a game that I played too much of because it tries to mirror Formula One. And to be honest with you, that's not really my play style, but I'm sure that there are lots of people out there who enjoy playing it. You got simulation. So these are designed to replicate the real life actions or an activity. So for example, if you are playing this flight simulator and you are going from Heathrow to Rome, in real life it takes 2 hours. So in your game it's going to take you 2 hours. And there are all kinds of simulation type games out there. You can think of games where you can drive literally across the continent of Europe, and if you go, I don't know, from Glasgow to Moscow, however long that would take in real life is how long it takes in the game. There are lots of people out there that love that type of stuff. I can't say it's something that I've played myself. Fighting games. So fighting games again are quite popular and are quite common, although probably not as much as what they used to be. So in the early, the late 1990s, early 2000s, there used to be a game called Tekken out, which has multiple iterations in Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, and it was so very popular for a while. I don't think it's quite as popular these days. I don't have the stats on me, but you've got one player or maybe two against a set number of other players, and I imagine it'll probably be quite fun if you had a few mates to play with. But the problem is that if you only have the same type of fights again and again and again and again, I can see that becoming quite dull. But I would imagine and I would hope that the newer games would have addressed this issue and would have fights that take place in multiple different locations and have multiple different things that you have to do in order to win, and maybe have different strengths and weaknesses, and that would make sense to me. So those are the games that are in the PowerPoint. There's obviously a big one that I haven't actually listed and probably should have, which is Shooter, which is a Call of Duty type game, again extremely popular, similar to EA in that the company that makes Call of Duty, for example, tends to release a new version year on year. I believe they have 2 studios and they work alternately, so it's not actually the same company that releases year on year, but I don't know whether that still happens. I haven't paid an awful lot of attention to Call of Duty in recent years. There are also other games like very popular games like Fortnite and Apex Predator, neither of which are games I've experienced, but you literally they're massive battle royales where it will be either you and potentially a team taking on whoever else is in there, and it'll be quite good fun, I suppose, for a while. But it's the type of thing that would definitely encourage things like microtransactions, because if you have the opportunity to buy loot boxes which can contain a nice new fancy gun, then people will do that, especially games like Call of Duty. There are other genres such as platformer out there, which would be things like some of the older games were very good platformers like Crash Bandicoot and so on. And what you can find is that there might well be games that will potentially fall under multiple different genre types, and that is what we expect from our games these days. We don't expect them generally to just be sitting in a single area. Generally you would expect the games that are really good, the AAA games, to be good in multiple different areas. If you think of a GTA Grand Theft Auto style game, it's an RPG, but then you've got multiple other different elements in there. You've got parts where you go driving around, so you could say it's got driving elements to it. There's lots of shooting activities within it. There are puzzle solving elements to it. There's lots of different things within it. And so that's what we expect from our AAA games this year. So don't kind of put them all in one basket. Most games will have a main genre, but most of them will also have different kind of aspects to it. So what I would like my students to do for the task for this activity, that doesn't make any sense. What I'd like my students to do, I'll get there in the end, is to create a blog within the Blogger account which includes 10 different genres. I appreciate I haven't put the number on the PowerPoint. I'm after you to look at 10 different genres with a description of each genre. So what is it? Features of each game genre. So what things make them different from each other. I'd like you to find examples of 2 or 3 games from each genre and perhaps look at their USP. So USP stands for unique selling point. Each game really needs a unique selling point. It needs to be different from other games. Otherwise, why would anyone buy it? So think about what is their USP. So if I think about something like a Gears of War game, the unique selling point is the cover system and the quality of the gun battles. It is far superior to a lot of other games out there. It is way superior to Call of Duty. But because it's much more of a simulative experience, I mean, it's not a simulation, but it's much more realistic. You have to take cover. Then a Call of Duty is perhaps a bit less accessible. And I'd like you to find a video clip or image from each one of the genres. So remember, this is a blog, so it's going to be a web page. I'd like it to look nice. Now, what I don't want is for a genre to be sport. This is where the game replicates a sport. Okay, you're going to need more detail than that. You're going to need a paragraph for each of these at least, which means several lines. Okay, so hopefully you enjoy doing that task, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching the video. I appreciate I've rambled on for 20 odd minutes now. But like I said, if you want to cover other types of genre, feel free to do that. You don't have to stick to the ones that I've got done in here. But hopefully they're giving you some pointers for where you need to go next. Thank you.